Award-winning TV presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
Peace be upon you. This is the news in brief. The Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak and the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad discussed the peace process and Damascus' ties with Washington, asking the International Quartet to review the Lebanese and Syrian factors. The Iranian Shihab-3 ballistic missile is entered into the service. Iran's arsenal remains controversial, and Israel expresses concern over the recent missile experiment. From Tehran, our correspondent Najah Muhammad Ali.
Tehran announced it launched the Shihab-3 missile with a range that could reach Israel, adding that they delivered the missile to the Iranian army after conducting the last experiments on it. Iran reiterated that it seeks peace and will only use this missile in self-defense in the event that the United States and Israel waged a war against Iran.
2 U.S. transports of soldiers were destroyed during an ambush in the city of Ramadi. Meanwhile, 2 Iraqis were killed when the U.S. forces fired at their car. Israel's Central Court in Haifa prolongs the detention of 5 leaders of the Islamic movement from inside the Green Line. Now to our correspondent in Haifa, Shireen Yunus.
The defense and prosecution volleyed during the second court session at the Central Court in Haifa, convened for the trial of the 5 activists from the Islamic movement currently detained in Israeli jails. The court decided to extend their imprisonment until July 17th. During this time, the prosecution and defense will be able to review the case.
A team of U.S. military experts consisting of 20 individuals arrive in Liberia to pave the way for more troops, and Washington is considering sending a peacekeeping force. The Russian president presided over a meeting with his ministers in the Kremlin and announced that the armed Chechens play a major role in international terrorism, saying that he will not make any sacrifices for them. This is the end of the news in brief. Iran announced that they conducted experiments on the Shihab-3 missile with a range that could reach Israel. The official foreign ministry spokesman, Hamid Rida Asafi, stated that the experiments were conducted weeks before delivering the missile to the army to be put in service. Asafi reiterated that the missile will only be used in self-defense against a possible U.S. attack backed by Israel.
Iran's announcement that Israel is now within its missile range is part of the media war currently taking place between Iran, the United States, and Israel, according to the Iranians. This announcement was made by Iran's foreign ministry's official spokesman, who reiterated that his country seeks peace. However, they will defend themselves against any attacks, especially an attack that is waged because of their nuclear reactor, which, as he said, is for peaceful purposes. The experiment took place over several weeks. The missile's range is, as we stated before, it can reach Israel. This was the last experiment before delivering the missile to the Iranian army to be put into service. Iranian officials previously stated that the missile range is 1,300 kilometers and is part of a developed series of missiles which Iran is producing on its own. They are developing their defense powers and reinforcing their resistance strategies to face any danger. On numerous occasions, Iran displayed their military capabilities, sending a strong message to those concerned. This is nothing new. It is clear that the Israelis are a little late with their information. This missile will not be used against any Arab or Muslim country. It is only to defend our country from a possible U.S. attack backed by Israel. This announcement was in response to an article published last week in the Israeli Haaretz newspaper, saying that Iran conducted experiments on the missile a week earlier. Now it is able to strike Israel and the U.S. forces stationed in the Persian Gulf. In response, Iran made their announcement. However, this reflects Iran's seriousness in defending their country against any real threat to it, especially after the United States is winding down its activities in Iraq. This announcement is nothing new for Iran. They are gearing the public opinion towards a long war with the United States of America, which may be both on the political and the media levels. Nevertheless, they emphasize that they are seeking peace. Najah Muhammad Ali, Tehran.
The arrest of Turkish soldiers in northern Iraq has created a crisis in Washington-Ankara's relations. What happened can be categorized as a minor incident, but the issue has deeper implications about the nature of relationship between the two countries. Before the occupation of Iraq, Turkey was an important regional ally for the United States. It was used as a tool to penetrate Europe and the Islamic republics in the former Soviet Union. However, the new realities in Iraq may cause Turkey to lose this role.
لم تكن حادثة احتجاز الجنود الأتراك لتحدث لولا أن تغييرا ما حدث في استراتيجية.
The incident of detaining 11 Turkish soldiers would have never happened if the United States foreign policy in the entire region did not change. The incident itself is not a serious crisis in the United States and Turkish relations, but it indicates that Washington has reconsidered the significance of the Turkish regional role in serving its interest after the occupation of Iraq.
خبراء الاستراتيجية في البنتاغون تمكنوا خلال العشرية التي عقبت الحرب الباردة.
In the wake of the Cold War, the Pentagon's strategic planners managed to decrease their need for their historic allies through what they call liberation plans, by creating an additional military presence in Eurasia, which stretches through Europe and Asia, covering Eastern Europe and all the Islamic republics of the former Soviet Union. The United States military presence in this region enabled the Americans to achieve two strategic goals. First, containing the Islamic region that breeds dangerous fundamental Islamists. Second, controlling the oil fields in the Caspian Sea and the Gulf. Ironically, the Turkish role, which was instrumental in achieving this policy, has diminished, leaving fewer reasons for the United States to maintain its strategic alliance. Of course, this was catalyzed by the Turkish parliament's decision to refuse giving the United States forces any accommodations to use the American bases in Turkey for opening a northern front. Nonetheless, some American experts say that Turkey is still a strategic ally in the Middle East because of its role in transporting oil and natural gas from the Gulf to Western markets through the Paco-Silal pipeline, which was built in an agreement reached by the United States, Turkey, and Azerbaijan. The agreement isolated Russia because it caused it to lose its role in transporting oil from the Caspian Sea. Before the war on Iraq, Turkey was used to penetrate the region, but the occupation of Iraq may have caused the United States to reconsider the role of Turkey. The intensive American military presence in the Gulf, which was enforced by the occupation of Iraq, has undermined the need for Turkey. Furthermore, the Turkish fear of the Kurdish situation in Iraq and its implications on the Kurds of Turkey has caused the United States to be suspicious of Turkey. The United States is concerned about the Turkish attempt to intervene in Iraq, which now has become exclusively the business of the United States. Of course, the White House will not tolerate such attempts at all. Initially, the Israeli government gave the green light to release only 400 Palestinian political prisoners. Releasing such a limited number of prisoners may endanger the ceasefire agreement. According to Hamas and Jihad, the ceasefire agreement was made on the condition of releasing all Palestinian political prisoners.
The Israeli government put difficult conditions on releasing the prisoners, which may end the ceasefire agreement announced by Palestinian factions. A senior Israeli politician said that while Prime Minister Ariel Sharon was reading the list of conditions that were agreed on by his cabinet, he said that it is impossible to release prisoners whose hands are soaked with Jewish blood. According to the same senior Israeli official, Palestinian prisoners who sent others to attack Israelis and active members of the Hamas and Jihad organizations will not be released. Israel did not disclose the exact number of prisoners that will be released, but Israeli radio reported that 400 prisoners fulfill the government conditions for release.
هذا ولم تعلن إسرائيل عدد السجناء الذين سيتم إطلاق سراحهم، لكن إذاعة العدو ذكرت أن
This number is much less than what the Palestinians had demanded. They are demanding the release of all political prisoners held by Israel, which number between 6,000 and 8,000 prisoners. The release of limited numbers of prisoners threatens the ceasefire agreement. Both Hamas and Jihad announced that the ceasefire agreement was reached on condition of releasing all Palestinian prisoners.
ممكن أن يعرض الهدنة للخطر، فحركتا حماس والجهاد الإسلامي أعلنتا أن تعليق عملياتهما مشروط بإطلاق سراح كل الأسرى الفلسطينيين.
Meanwhile, after the Israeli cabinet meeting, the Palestinian Minister of Security, Mohammed Dahlan, met Israeli Defense Minister Shaul Mufaz for the first time. Mufaz said that the meeting was positive and that the Palestinians appear to have good intentions, adding that there is a hope that they may start to fight what he called terrorism. Meanwhile, in the Gaza Strip, 3,000 Palestinians protested in solidarity with the Palestinian political prisoners and detainees held by the occupation forces. The protesters held signs demanding the release of political prisoners and pictures of their imprisoned sons and daughters while they started marching from the headquarters of the International Red Cross to the Legislative Council in Gaza. The protest was called for by the National and Islamic Forces Steering Committee in solidarity with the political prisoners in Israeli prisons. The committee confirmed that it will not accept any political solution that would not include the release of all political prisoners. One of the Islamic Jihad movement's leaders, Nafez Azzam, said that he does not accept the way that Israel deals with the political prisoners issue.
The objective of this march is to confirm that all of us are standing firm with the Palestinian political prisoners. Their cause is the concern of every Palestinian. While the talk about the release of prisoners is still going on, we refuse the Israeli proposal of enforcing different conditions for releasing the prisoners. We insist the release of prisoners must be consistent. All political prisoners must be released, regardless of their affiliation or the organizations that they belong to.
Meanwhile, the Palestinian National Resistance Committees announced that they are still committed to the temporary ceasefire, which was declared by major Palestinian factions 1 week ago. The representatives from Palestinian factions explained that they have decided to continue with the conditional 3-month ceasefire that was announced by the national and Islamic factions, taking into consideration its historic responsibility to maintain national unity.
The U.S. occupation in Iraq suffered more casualties overnight. A U.S. military spokesman admitted 2 U.S. soldiers were killed in 2 separate attacks in Baghdad when their patrols came under attack. The pair of killings followed the fatal shooting of a U.S. soldier Sunday in a cafeteria at Baghdad University and the injuring of 4 U.S. soldiers after attackers fired a rocket-propelled grenade at their convoy in the western town of Ramadi. An Iraqi civilian was also killed in the town, reportedly by U.S. gunfire.
As U.S. officials try to play down resistance attacks in occupied Iraq, 2 more U.S. troops were killed Sunday overnight in separate attacks in Baghdad when their patrols came under fire. In the first attack, a U.S. soldier in the Al-Azamiya neighborhood was involved in a firefight with 2 Iraqi resistance fighters, one of whom was shot dead. Hours later, another soldier was killed as a homemade bomb hit his vehicle during the late-night patrol in the Kazimiya neighborhood north of Baghdad. The pair of killings followed the fatal shooting of a U.S. soldier Sunday in a cafeteria at Baghdad University. Witnesses said the soldier was shot in the head at a close range. Another soldier was injured in the attack and remained on the scene for treatment. U.S. Army reinforcements arrived and evacuated the dead soldier after sealing off the area and detaining several Iraqi men and women for questioning. As attacks on coalition forces continue to mount, at least 69 U.S. soldiers have been killed in different incidents, 29 in resistance attacks since U.S. President George W. Bush declared major combat over in Iraq. Outside the capital, U.S. troops were subject to a rocket-propelled grenade attack in the Iraqi town of Ramadi, west of Baghdad, Sunday night. Powerful explosions were heard in the town some 100 kilometers west of the capital. 4 soldiers were injured in the attack, and U.S. troops backed by helicopters returned fire and calmed the area. One Iraqi man sitting in his car with his son was killed as he was caught in the crossfire. In the meantime, a U.S.-Turkish spat over the arrest of 11 Turkish soldiers in northern Iraq last Friday dropped off as they were released Sunday night. Turkish news network quoted a diplomatic source as saying that the soldiers would arrive in northern Iraq to where they were detained after spending their night in the Iraqi capital on suspicion of involvement in an alleged plot to harm Iraqi officials in the north. The U.S. State Department said that the two nations would take part in a joint investigation of the matter. But the head of Turkey's powerful army, Hilmi Özkök, said the arrest has led to the most serious crisis of confidence between the two NATO allies.
The first meeting of Baghdad City Council is due to take place later Monday as representatives of major Iraqi political groups meet in the Kurdish-held north to discuss plans by the US-led administration for an interim governing body. According to UN Special Envoy Sergio Vieira de Mello, US Occupation Administrator Paul Bremer will unveil in the next 2 weeks a transitory governing council with real executive powers in a departure from earlier plans to give the interim body a strictly advisory role. And sources close to the group's meeting in Salah ad-Din said they would try to agree on a future president of the proposed governing council, as well as discussing its membership. Iraqis have made no secret of their frustration at the process of democracy, criticizing plans not to hold a general election for at least 1 year.
Representatives of major Iraqi political groups are due to gather in the northern Iraqi city of Salah ad-Din Monday to discuss plans by the US-led occupation administration for an interim governing body. And political sources pointed that the new council will have real executive authorities that would make it qualified to practice the fundamentals of governing in order to fill the political security and constitutional gaps.
There are attempts to reach a certain form. Iraqi factions are consulting with each other and have been able to display their point of view concerning the transformation of the political council to what will be called the governing council. Iraqi groups demand that all the Iraqi population be represented and that the choice of the governing council be an Iraqi choice.
The governing council will choose from its members a secretary general whose task would be to coordinate and to be a charge d'affaires of the internal and external political representation. This post is expected to spark competition among the council members since it would be considered as the finest post in occupied Iraq. On the other hand, efforts are still exerted to merge elements along with the Council of Seven to the governing council. The 7-strong leadership council includes Masoud al-Barazani of the Kurdistan Democratic Party, Jalal Talabani of the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan, Sayyid Muhammad Baqir al-Hakim of the Supreme Assembly for the Islamic Revolution in Iraq, Ahmad Shalabi of the Pentagon-backed National Congress, Ayyad Allawi of the National Accord, Al-Jafari, Nasir al-Jadirshi, Adnan Bacheshi, and Mohsen Abdul Hamid of the Islamic Party. Al-Sharif Ali of the Constitutional Monarchy Movement and the Communist Party did not certify their participation in the governing council. The interim body would work in parallel with a separate, much longer convention that would draw up a new Iraqi constitution.
The Time magazine reported Monday that U.S. troops and some Iraqi exiles caused tens of millions of dollars damage by vandalizing Baghdad's airport after they seized it on April 2nd. The report added that soldiers needlessly shot up the airport and trashed 5 serviceable Boeing airplanes. A U.S. civil affairs officer said the looting took place over a 2-week period by the U.S. 3rd Infantry Division. Ironically, there were signs written in English on the airport walls that warned looters and vandals that they would be court-martialed. A parliamentary committee Monday cleared the British government of misleading the country in the run-up to the Iraq war over the threat posed by Saddam Hussein, but criticized Prime Minister Tony Blair for publishing an unreliable intelligence dossier on Iraq's alleged banned weapons. Meanwhile, the BBC's Board of Governors stands by the editorial decision to report that Downing Street had made an intelligence dossier more appealing to justify war. Also, a former U.S. ambassador who investigated reports that Niger sold uranium to Iraq said Sunday that the U.S. government exaggerated the intelligence to justify the war against Iraq. Until now, the U.S.-led coalition has found no trace of alleged banned weapons.
The governors of the British Broadcasting Corporation stood by a BBC News report that British government officials doctored intelligence about Iraq's alleged weapons of mass destruction to boost the case for war. The report said that officials in Blair's office made the dossier on Iraq's chemical and biological weapons more appealing to persuade skeptical lawmakers of the need for war. BBC correspondent Andrew Milligan in May cited an unidentified senior intelligence official as saying Tony Blair aides had redrafted an intelligence dossier to include claims that Iraq could launch chemical and biological weapons at 45 minutes' notice. The story, denounced by the Prime Minister as absurd, soured the state-funded broadcaster's relationship with Blair's administration. Meanwhile, an envoy sent by the CIA to Africa to investigate allegations about Iraq's nuclear weapons program on Sunday contended the Bush administration manipulated his findings, possibly to strengthen the rationale for war. Joseph Wilson, former U.S. ambassador to the West African nation of Gabon, was dispatched in February 2002 to explore whether Iraq tried to buy uranium from Niger, the world's third largest producer of mined uranium.
What they did is they made that decision and then they backfilled it with whatever they could come up with to justify the war that they'd already decided to make. Well, I came to the conclusion that it was literally impossible for this to have taken place in the absence of a broad conspiracy.
Wilson said he spent 8 days talking to dozens of people in Niger, and he wrote that it was highly doubtful that any such transaction took place. Yet, nearly a year after he had briefed CIA officials, the assertion that Iraq was trying to obtain uranium from Africa was included in President George W. Bush's State of the Union address as a U.S. march towards war with Iraq. About a month after Bush's speech, the United Nations determined the uranium reports were based mostly on forged documents. Last month, U.S. National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice tried to explain how the discredited rumor still somehow made it into the Bush's speech, saying that any doubts about the reports were never passed on to the administration. But Wilson, who used to work for the National Security Advisor, rejected Rice's comments.
It could be that, in fact, the information just got lost. Alternatively, it could be that the answer that they got was an answer they didn't like, and therefore they discarded it, while still keeping the rumor.
The U.S. envoy thinks that if the Bush administration used the issue of WMDs as a cover to go to war for other reasons, then it has done a grave disservice to that threat.
Iraq's U.S.-led civilian administration said it will introduce a new currency in the country and that Iraqis can swap their existing dinars for it starting October 15th. Speaking on Iraqi television, Paul Bremer said the new unit would be a variation on the older so-called Swiss dinar, now circulating in the northern-controlled Kurdish area. The new unit would be exchanged at parity with dinars bearing the portrait of ousted Iraqi President Saddam Hussein, circulating in the south, and at the rate of 150 new dinars to one so-called Swiss dinar, now changing hands in the north.
For the first time in 12 years, all of Iraq will again use one set of banknotes. We have decided not to design a new currency for Iraq. Only a sovereign Iraqi government could make that decision if it were needed. So we have taken the designs of the former national dinar, the so-called Swiss dinar, But the new notes will be impossible to confuse with the Swiss dinar, as both the colors and the denominations will be different.
Meanwhile, CIA officials said they believe Saddam Hussein's voice was on the recently released audio tape that warned of more bloodshed in Iraq and urged Iraqis to support resistance to U.S. forces. CIA spokesman Bill Harlow said the quality of the audio tape aired on July 4th by Arabic television channel Al Jazeera was poor, so it cannot be determined with absolute certainty that it is Saddam's voice. However, he said the CIA's assessment after a technical analysis of the tape was that it was most likely Saddam's voice. He added that the exact date of the recording could not be determined. Another U.S. intelligence official said the rhetoric, style, and substance of the message on the tape was consistent with previous messages by Saddam.
Signing of the additional protocols of the International Atomic Energy Agency (IAEA) by Iran should not be considered as a provision for Iran-EU ties. Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman Hamid Reza Safi, in his talks to reporters Monday, termed the use of threat and sanctions against Iran as ineffective, reiterating a number of unreasonable stances adopted and remarks made by European officials concerning Iran's peaceful use of nuclear technology will lead to nothing but distrust in the Iran-EU relations, which in turn will bring about negative consequences for both sides. Referring to the MKO terrorist grouping's activity in the U.S., Mr. Asafi said, American officials in their practical fight against terrorism should in the first place confront MKO terrorist group. Meanwhile, on the sidelines of the briefing session, Foreign Ministry spokesman assessed the upcoming visit to Iran by the General Director of the AEAA, Mohammad al-Baradei, as highly significant. Iran and Russia signed on Monday a memorandum of understanding on the two sides' cooperation in the area of oil and gas. Under the MOU, inked by head of Iran's Foundation for the Underprivileged, Mr. Fruzandeh, and Russian Energy Minister Yusufov, Tehran and Moscow will cooperate on constructing power plants, pumping and exploring oil derivatives, drawing up technical projects, building undergrounds, and providing services in oil and gas fields. Iranian twins Laleh and Ladan Bijani, conjoined at the heads, are still in the operating theater, while the nation's hearts are beating for them and wishing the medical team success.
Describing the twins' general conditions as favorable, Raffles Hospital authorities in Singapore say doctors, though, have encountered complications during the most critical stage of the highly risky operation to separate the conjoined heads of Iranian twins Laleh and Ladan Bijani. Hospital spokesman Prem Kumar Nair has told reporters that surgeons had discovered the twins' brains were more closely linked than previously thought, meaning there would be lengthy delays in the operation. He said the twins' blood pressure was also proving unstable, which should be rectified before progressing any further. Nair told the press conference at 14 GMT, 37 hours after the operation began, that since the twins have been fused together for the past 29 years, their brains are very adherent to each other. The section to separate them is thus taking a long time, he added, because the neurosurgeons have to cut through the tissue very carefully. Nair, however, did not say the complications were a setback for the twins, insisting the surgeons knew there would be unforeseen problems. He went on to say the risk is still pretty much the same as what we have always stated. 29-year-old Laleh and Ladan Bijani are the first adult twins joined at the head to ever undergo surgery to be separated, and doctors have warned the attempt could prove fatal to one or both of them.
Mosaic is made possible by a grant from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, which promotes journalism excellence worldwide and invests in the vitality of 26 U.S. communities, and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation,